How's it going, YouTube? Coming in today with another video, and today, guys, what the bring to you is going to be the Mitsurugi video. I wanted to make this because the decks went from being very okay to overly broken to just being mid to just being like, how is it gonna perform? And I think that's really interesting too because the deck feels like it's being very pushed right now, and I'm not convinced. I was, but now I'm kind of in limbo between it's really broken and it's like okay. So we'll talk about why I think that is and the ways that you can counter the deck and the reasons why I think that it is really good and the reasons why I think that it's like okay. I'm very glad to be back. I was on stream just like when I got my appendix out and I was like, man, I don't feel good. And then boom, in the hospital, right? I was on stream and I was like, I don't feel good. And then 20 minutes later, I was in an ambulance going to the hospital. So it's been a moment. Currently, it is Sunday. I was sick on Tuesday, and it's been a process. It's been a process. They compared it to surviving an exorcism, so not my favorite, but I'm glad to be back to make content for y'all. You guys know that y'all mean the world to me, and I can't wait to meet more of you in Orlando. Now, if you haven't already checked out my sponsors over in Imperium Duels, Dragonshield, Gem, Cloud, RW, or Grimoire, definitely go ahead and do so all down below in the description. Also, subscribe to the channel because we're trying to hit our goal of 30,000. So, let's hop into the video because there's honestly just so much to talk about with this deck. The deck can be very oppressive, but it also has some pretty crazy choke points. But the number one thing is it impossible to beat? And that's going to be a very hard no, but it can feel like that. So Droll is the craziest card against this deck. Like if you drop Droll, it's wraps. It's wraps. Like there is not a whole lot that your opponent's doing through this. Maybe like detonator pass, but even if you're playing like a mirror match, at least like on the Ryziel part, right? If they go Det Pass, you're just like, okay, summon X, pitch Mirio, X1 Mirio 2. That's just the game, right? But I do think that there's multiple situations that we'll talk about today that are very in your favor when you're playing against a deck like this. And the build's not solved yet either. There's been multiple ways to play this. Will you see this at Orlando? Absolutely. Should you be maining Droll? Yes, you should. But I main 2 Droll and I side 1. I think that's the best ratio for this card, especially if you're playing to things like Malice that don't care about Droll. You don't want to draw dead cards against that deck. So that's another thing where you want to make sure that if you're playing Droll, if you want to commit on 3, you can. But there is a lot of validity to just maining 2 and siding 1. One of the biggest questions I get is, what's the difference between the two? If you're playing Fiendsmith Ryziel, if you're playing the Mitsurugi Ryziel. Well, they both get hurt by Droll pretty good, but at least with the Fiendsmith cards, you can still go through your line and go Caesar with a Lacrimo set up for the trap card in your graveyard if you get Drolled. So you do have some insurance in the Fiendsmith cards if you get Drolled. I personally like the Fiendsmith variant a lot more right now because I feel like if you get into a very controlled game state, you have a lot more say over what happens. Whereas the Mitsurugi cards, they pack a lot more power, but you also need cards to be able to provide that power. So like if you don't get like a ritual spell and a ritual or like ways to get there, it can get really clunky. And people are still on cards like Serpent too, so there's like more bricks in the deck that they're adding in. Then you have like the trap card, which is another brick as well. So you're adding in a lot more bricks to the deck to play something like Mitsurugi, but like when you pop off harder, right? So that's one thing for me where I'm like, okay, like that's a W deck. Whereas like you can get punished playing like the Fiendsmith cards, but I feel like the Fiendsmith cards are a lot more recursive and a little better for the grind game than I would say your typical Mitsurugi cards are. Because yes, you have like Trap for follow-up and whatnot as well, but I still feel like the Fiendsmith cards as far as follow-up have a lot more promise to get you further and get you into different things than just going back for the same Mitsurugi cards. Even though they're very strong at what they do, which is fine. Because another thing that people don't realize is that the Amino, you don't have to discard. You can always activate something. They activate Amino. You can just like let it get negated, which is fine because that can just be like activating Attract, Lurie, Blurry effect, and then they go amino, and you're like, cool, activate talent, right? So that's one thing where for me, I think that the deck's kind of misconstrued as like, oh, my hand's gonna get ripped and I'm not gonna be able to play the game and it's gonna be really rough. Not that bad. There's gonna be enough opportunity to where you should be okay. Cards like the Molcharmies, Thuas, Nealises, Perulias, if you have those cards, they're going to make your life a lot easier, especially because even if they have Amino, you're like, okay, you know, like, whatever, it doesn't really matter, because I can just discard one of my other cards that I have, right? So this format is going to be a lot of making sure that the game state is a lot more controlled, a lot more simple, and I feel like when you try to play something like Mitsurugi right now, it's a lot more explosive, it's trying to break that trend. But if you get caught into those really unique game states where it's very controlled, very grindy, I think that the Mitsurugi cards end up getting outgrinded. Whereas cards like Fiendsmith allow you to do a lot more, and you're actually going to be having a lot more room in your deck list to be able to do other things and have a lot more non-engine than you would with like the Mitsurugi cards. Now, I'm going to include this in like every ruling video that I have. I swear I'm going to do my best to just like always remind you. Location is something that I get so many questions about. Just know, if something is sent or attributed for cost, this is something that you have to know. It is so important. If you remove it from the place that it was sent to for cost, which is usually the graveyard, it will not meet a window to activate. And it's just because the place where it was supposed to activate in the new window was where it was sent. So when it's moved elsewhere, it has no idea where it's at, and the effect can't activate because it's in a new location. I know that can be really confusing, and it's another really big because Konami said so, but it's just how the new rules work. And I say new, but they're like old now. But they were part of the updated rules that we did get. But if you, if your opponent like Prayers Tribute Omno, and you Bishul Banish Omno, the Omno will not activate on the new chain link. So that is a massive thing that you have to know. This is a huge way to beat this deck, because usually you'll see your opponent go activate Ritual Spell, then they'll summon the Omno from their hand, then they'll go activate Ritual Spell, summon Futso from deck, tributing Omno, and they go Omno effect, and then you can Bishul it there, which is great, and that's why Bishuls are fantastic in this matchup. But your opponent could also, during your turn, go Prayers Tribute Omno, or they go Trap Tribute Omno. And the Trap is not a counter trap. So when they tribute it for cost, whether it be with the Trap or Prayer, you can also just Bestial away the Omno, and it doesn't get its effect or come back. So it's really important that you know this ruling. A lot of the builds right now are already cutting Nut of Your Servant, and that's kind of crazy to me because this card seems really broken, but it's not a true one-card starter. If you don't have anything else, yes, you get a draw off the Garura, and then you get another draw put back off the Baron Blossom, and then you also get the addition off of the Herald of the Arclight, but it doesn't guarantee that you're going to be able to get the body, because you do need the body and the Ritual Spell. So that's where things can get really difficult, and I can understand that's why people are cutting this card too, but the other thing is that it provides more room for hand traps. So a lot of the Mitsurugi builds are trying to cut down as far as they can. Mine is 42 cards right now, so that's one thing where you want to trim the fat, and a lot of times Nut of Your Servant and Maximus can get really awkward with those cards, because you're not really trying to lock yourself at any point, so you can go like Ryziel stuff, and then you can go Ritual stuff, and then you can go back to Ryziel, and then back to Ritual if you need to. And that's really cool because those two things don't interact with each other. So that's one thing for me where I'd say this card's not necessary, and if you want to test without it, I don't think that's even that bad of an idea. This is a card I thought about because of the fact that you can go ahead and just hit things like the Ritual Spell, which really isn't that bad. Usually we're only activating Delta whenever there's like a problematic spell in the format, and for me, that card's a problematic spell card, right? That's this is a very big issue. So that's one thing where if you really do want to play like 1 Gamma, 2 Delta, I don't hate it. I really don't. I think this card's pretty okay, but again, it's pretty okay. So we'll have to wait and see how effective this will be into the new meta. Meows, if you have this card, you really should run it. I know that it's like $50 a copy right now, but if you have them, run them. These should be in your sideboard, maining Fua, and then if you want to run this alongside like Perulia on the sideboard, you can. All of the Molcharmies right now are effectively just making sure that your opponent cannot just make a massive board on you. And that's one thing too with like the Mitsurugi cards. You want to make sure they can't just make a massive board on you. So you're dropping as many Molcharmies as possible to make sure that they just stop playing the game, right? And I really do like dropping Fua in the draw phase, but I think that if you're playing against Rizio, you just have to wait for like the ice summon because it's just too free. If you chain Fua to ice, they don't have Ash, they're gonna give you minimum 2 draws, which is just absolutely absurd. The last one here is Bell, and this is only if you really do respect Mitsurugi being a real deck going into this event. It has a good set of matchups into many different decks, so I do think that this is a card that does have merit, but I don't think that it's going to end up making the deck list for me. But this is one thing where you should play this if you do respect Mitsurugi and you think that is going to be a large part of the room. I hope that you enjoyed today's video. It does feel great to be back. I know that I've been gone for a few days, and I want to say sorry because, you know, you guys haven't had a video, but I needed some rest. I was not feeling good at all. That was the worst thing I've ever been through. I'm not even being facetious about that. That was the, by God, worst thing I've ever been through. So I do feel great to be back. I'm very happy about that. And if you haven't already checked out my Twitter, Twitch, Instagram, or Discord, definitely go ahead and do so. And I'll catch you all in the next video. Thank you.